Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, and in some cases, even good morning. My name is Chloe Evans, and I'm the Senior Program Associate for the International Fisheries Conservation Project with the Ocean Foundation. A major focus of our work is promoting the development, adoption of harvest strategies, also known as management procedures, at tuna RFMOs, and now increasingly at general RFMOs as well. As part of that effort, we host harveststrategies.org, an online clearinghouse for all things related to management procedures. We're thrilled to be working with the Common Oceans Program at FAO, which is funded by the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, on the ABNJ Tuna 2 project. ABNJ stands for Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, and in other words, the high seas. And the project's overarching goal is to ensure all major tuna stocks are fished sustainably by 2025. Management procedures are a key component of reaching that goal. Today's event is 8th in the series of 16 quarterly webinars that we are hosting over the course of this 4-year project. We are officially halfway there. The focus of today's session is on the development and application of management procedures at general RFMOs, regional fishery management organizations that oversee non-tuna fisheries, including deep sea, groundfish, and other species. While general RFMOs often face different challenges than tuna-focused RFMOs, many are seeking important strides towards adopting science-based management procedures. This webinar offers an opportunity to learn from their experiences and explore opportunities for cross-RFMO learning. We're honored to have a distinguished group of speakers joining us here today from across the general RFMO landscape. The format will include 5 short presentations followed by a 30-minute panel discussion and Q&A. Before we dive in, just a couple of quick housekeeping items to take care of first. Please keep your microphone muted and your cameras off unless you are speaking. We're offering interpretation in English and Spanish and French. You can access it by clicking the interpretation globe at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll hold all questions until the Q&A at the very end. At that point, feel free to use the raise your hand function and ask your question live, or you can submit it at any time via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel shortly after the event. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. To begin our session today, we'll hear from Dr. Fernando González Costas, head of the service at the Spanish Institute for Oceanography at the Vigo Oceanographic Center. He'll be speaking about the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization's leadership in this space, including their adoption of the first internationally applied MSC-tested management procedure and the development of a new precautionary approach framework.
In the management procedure and the new PA framework. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Can you confirm you see my screen in full presentation?
Yes, we can see it. It looks great. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my name is Fernando González Costas. I am the co-chair of the Risk-Based Management Strategy NAFO Working Group. And I'm going to talk about, during my presentation, I'm going to talk about the original NAFO PA framework, the main issues of this framework. After, we are going to see the NAFO Convention objective. The new NAFO Convention was signed in 2017. After that, we are going to see the main results of the workshop carried out in 2022 to define the new objective and main characteristics of the new NAFO PA framework. And after that, I'm going to talk about the development and testing of the new NAFO PA framework approved last September. And to finalize, I'm going to make a summary of the specific management procedure the Scientific Council has been working in the last years. Well, the original NAFO PA framework was approved by the Commission in 2004. In this figure, you have the basic structure of the original framework. As you can see, this framework only have limit and buffer reference points, and these reference points delimit 5 different biomass and fishing mortality zones. And in the table below, you have the management actions to be taken in each of the different zones. One of the major issues of this framework was the management actions was defined only to avoid the limit reference points, but they don't have a clear target to drive in the biomass of the fishing mortality. They also don't have a clear harvest control rule to produce the advice. And finally, many of the management actions are taken based in the low risk to reach the limited reference points. And this kind of low risk is very difficult to well estimate it and is highly dependent on the data available for the different stocks. Well, as I commented before, in 2017 was signed a new NAFO convention. And in the Article 2, there are the objective of this new convention, and the objective is to ensure the long-term conservation and sustainable use of the fishery resources and to safeguard the marine ecosystems. In the Article 3 of this new convention, there are also the general principles, and there are some general principles related with the PA framework. One of them is to ensure the fishery resource are maintained and restored to levels capable of producing the maximum sustainable yield. We also have a general principle to apply the precautionary approach agreement to produce the advice, and also we have other general principles to prevent or eliminate the overfishing. Well, all these objectives and general principles was translated by the risk-based management strategy working group and the PA working group in the objective of the new PA framework. And these objectives were the following: low risk of stock depletion, rebuilding stocks to BMSY, maintaining stocks above BMSY more often than not, maintain the average catches around maximum sustainable yield in the long term, and low risk of overfishing. That were the objective of the new PA framework. Well, in 2022 was carried out one workshop between managers, scientists, and stakeholders to define the main characteristics of the new PA framework. And the conclusions of this workshop was the following: there are room to improve the original framework to align it better with the new objective of the convention signed in 2017. They was also agreed with the definition of the original limit reference points, and also the need of the pre-agreement management actions to be taken in function of the situation of the biomass and fishing mortality. The workshop also agreed to define a new effect target reference point in the new framework, and also studied the implementation of the intermediate biomass reference points between Belin and BMSY. They also agreed to don't include inside the framework of the recovery plans, but we have the idea it's possible we need in some special case in the future develop special recovery plans outside of this framework. And to finalize, the new PA should be very flexible to try to apply this framework to a wide range of the different NAFO stocks with very different biological characteristics. Well, After this objective and conclusions, the scientific council develop different between 2022 and 2024 different frameworks with different reference points and harvest control rule, and these different frameworks was applying a selection of the NAFO stocks to see the final advice produced under the different scenarios. And after see all the results, the RFMOs working group select the leaf, what we call the leaf approach to further testing and further development. The main reason to choose this harvest control rule, leaf harvest control rule by the managers was because they don't want a very prescriptive harvest control rule. They prefer a more flexible harvest control rule to produce or to choose the final leaf of F to apply. Well, after that, the scientific council tested in two different ways the leaf approach. The first way was the specific way. In this case, we apply the leaf harvest control rule to a selection of the NAFO stocks and see in the long term if this harvest control rule reach the objective you have in the screen and we see before. And the second way was we call the generic way. In this case, we simulated 4 different populations with the main characteristics of the NAFO stocks. And after that, we developed for each of the populations 2 operating models, one based in the aggregated biomass, and the other was a H-structure operating model. And to these different operating models, we apply different different conjunctions of the error. And after all that, we see in the long term if the results reach the objective you have in the table. The main conclusions after see the result is the leaf harvest control rule work quite well to reach the more important objective established by the Commission. Between that is this harvest control rule work to promoting the stock biomass and stabilize the biomass levels far away from the Berlin. They also work to rebuild the stocks above B trigger in the healthy zone. We are going to see after, but it fails in the short term to maintain the stocks above BMSY more often than not, which was an objective established also by the Commission. Well, now we are going to see in more detail the framework approved in September 2024. Here in the screen you have the basic structure. As you can see, there are 2 biomass reference points which delimit 3 different zones. The critical zone for biomass below Berlin, the cautious zone for biomass between Berlin and Betrigger, and the healthy zone for biomass above Betrigger. The framework also have an F-link and F-target reference points. In the table below, you have the initial values for these reference points. For F-limit was agreed to use FMSY, for F-target was agreed to use 0.85 FMSY, for B-trigger was used 0.75 BMSY, and for Berlin 0.3 BMSY. And we also agree and approve the management action table you have in the screen. In the healthy zone, the scientific council should give the Commission with a range of F around F target, and the Commission should choose the final level F with the objective to maintain the biomass in the healthy zone. In the cautious zone, the scientific council should give a range of F inside of the leaf area, and the Commission should choose the final F value with the objective to avoid belling and to promote the growth of the stock. And finally, in the critical zone, F should be set as low as possible with the objective to rebuild the stock outside of the critical zone. Well, this framework gives to the managers to a certain flexibility to choose the final levels as they want. The framework also approve or also have a risk table to present it the consequences of the different level of F to help the Commission to choose the final F value in the different zones. Well, the next steps, as I commented before, this framework was approved in 2024, and 2025 should be the first year we are going to apply this new approach. And to do that, we need to estimate the reference points of this new approach for all the stocks. To do that, we are going to have in May and PA meeting to start to work in this tax. We also need to study how we are going to implement it, this new approach in the stocks assessed only based on the survey information. And also we need to study how we are going to implement this new approach for the stocks with very specific biological characteristics like red fish and small pelagics. And in the future, this framework should be reviewed and improved inside of the RBME's working group. One of the characteristics this working group is a joint Commission Scientific Council joint group. That means in this working group participate managers and scientists to discuss and to make recommendations to approve by the NAFO Commission. And finally, I would like to make a summary of the specific management procedure. Apart from develop the new PA, the Scientific Council in the last year has been working in the specific management procedure for some stocks. The first one was the green and halibut. We started to work in 2008, and in 2010 was tested and approved a harvest control rule. This harvest control rule was in place till 2017. In 2017 was developed a new harvest control rule, and this new harvest control rule was revised in 2024 and was approved last year to use in the next 10 years. For COP3N, we make we try 2 times to develop a management strategy to reach all the management objectives established for this stock, but these 2 times the Scientific Council failed to found a management procedure which reached all the objectives established by the Commission for this stock. And finally, for the red fish, in 2014 was tested and approved a harvest control rule. This harvest control rule was in place till 2021. And since 2022, the Scientific Council is working to develop a new harvest control rule, and this work is ongoing till now. And that is all I have to talk about the NAFO management procedure and new PA. In the last 3 slides, you have a list of documents if you want to take more information for the new PA and the specific management procedure developed in the last years by the Scientific Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fernando. That was excellent. A really great overview of NAFO's pioneering work. We really appreciate all of the insights that you had to share with us. Next, we will turn to the North Pacific, where another general RFMO is making progress. And for that talk, we have Dr. Grant Lee Galland of Pew Charitable Trusts, and he will share lessons from the development of MPs at the North Pacific Fisheries Commission, providing important insights on both the technical process and stakeholder engagement. Grant, take it away. Grant, if you're talking, you might still be muted.
Let me abandon my headset and see if that fixes it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you and your slides look great.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first, I just want to say that unlike all the other speakers today, I'm not an expert in the NPFC. Everyone else here is maybe an officer holder or someone from the secretariat of the RFMO where they're presenting. But given that the meeting is overnight in Japan time, where many of the experts are and where the secretariat sits, Chloe asked if I could step in and present on this topic. So apologies to any NPFC colleagues who are watching the recording for any mistakes I may make, but that's my little caveat here. And then just to offer a little bit of context on management procedures that have been adopted around the world by RFMOs. There have been 15 adopted to date, so with 10 of those at the tuna RFMOs and 5 at the general RFMOs, but I expect the general RFMOs to not only catch up quickly, but eventually take a huge lead over the tuna RFMOs and the number of MPs that have been adopted, because there are just a huge number of stocks and fisheries that are managed by the 8 general RFMOs. And already in 2025, there should be another 2 or maybe 3 or more MPs adopted this year by general RFMOs. And I think you'll see these 2 lists start to look much more equal. So the NPFC is as an RFMO in the North Pacific, and I just wanted to show the convention area here and specifically point out that the convention area includes only the high seas. You know, some of our tuna colleagues are used to convention areas covering coast to coast, the entire area under the jurisdiction of that RFMO, but NPFC, like several of the general RFMOs, only includes the high seas, and that does lead to some unique problems or challenges for these RFMOs, but so far they have worked pretty smoothly, and they've found ways to overcome those challenges. Being a general RFMO, NPFC is charged with managing everything from chub mackerel to Pacific sari, squids, deep sea demersal fishes like North Pacific armorhead or splendid alfonsino. So very wide biodiversity of fisheries that NPFC is managing. And it is among the newest RFMOs as well. In fact, it just held its 9th commission meeting. It may still be considered the newest RFMO until the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Organization is finalized, but certainly it's among the newest. And you can see here a picture of the different heads of delegation and the chair who were in person together in Osaka last month. So with respect to MP development, NPFC started with this little humble fish called the Pacific sari, which is extremely important forage fish in the North Pacific. It forms an important part of marine food webs there. It forms a very important part of cultures in the North Pacific, especially the Western North Pacific. So it's something that's been fished very heavily for a long time. And not only to support human culture, but also it's eaten by a variety of predators, including things that are commercially important, like North Pacific albacore, swordfish, but also species that are kind of more charismatic in nature, less commercially important, like different seabirds and marine mammals. So this is an important forage fish. And one of the driving factors in founding the NPFC was its very large scale fishing that started to decline. In fact, as you can see here, in recent years, the stocks have declined substantially, and as a result, the catch per unit effort has suffered. And that was, again, one of the driving factors for forming the NPFC. But throughout this first decade of NPFC science, it has been difficult to develop a stock assessment. So management strategy evaluation, or MSE, was seen as a scientific tool that could help NPFC scientists and managers better understand the status of the stock. As that process was underway and those tools were being developed, it became clear that MSE could also be used, like it is all around the world, to support adoption of a harvest control rule and eventually a full MP. In other words, it could be used to test different management options and find one that meets the manager's expectations. And in fact, in 2024, just last year, NPFC did adopt its first interim harvest control rule. That was for Pacific Sari, and it was based on an MSE-like model. So it's still there's still some ongoing work to complete the MSE and eventually adopt a full MP. But certainly this effort went from being an examination of the status of the stock and led to what has basically become the basis of a whole new management system to not only support recovery of the stock, but also promote long-term sustainability. So what happened in this year? Well, it was adopted last year, as I mentioned, and already being a short-lived species, the interim HCR required a 10% reduction in catch from last year. And this was notable at the commission meeting last month because that 10% reduction was agreed in just a matter of a few minutes. And that has not always been the case for difficult management issues at NPFC. And in fact, it took several days to agree to catch limits for some other priority fisheries. So the fact that it happened in just a matter of minutes was really notable. There are ongoing sort of allocation and compliance issues. It's not an allocated fishery, it's an Olympic fishery, but there are ongoing issues to ensure that the catch doesn't go beyond the limit set by the HCR. But that's something that we've seen in other RFMOs as well. And the fact that they could agree to a limit so quickly was really an important example of how MPs and simulation tested HCRs can be a important tool for the future of fisheries management. Now NPFC, in addition to completing the work for Pacific Sari to convert that HCR into a full management procedure, NPFC is also considering how MPs could be used for other fisheries. I did want to just quickly mention that in last December at the most recent scientific committee, Pew and the Ocean Foundation facilitated a workshop on MSE for all of NPFC scientists and other interested stakeholders. And that was well attended and received positive remarks and has actually fostered scientific collaboration already. So it seems like NPFC is ready to expand beyond Pacific Sari for the MP development. There were, in fact, at that meeting, right after the workshop, the full SC met, and the SC endorsed several MP and MSE related recommendations, which were then adopted with the scientific committee's report by the commission last month. And those included things like, I've already mentioned, developing full MSE and completing the process for Pacific Sari, but also noting the value of MSE for understanding the status of any stock. There was a SC recommendation to explore options to develop MSE for the neon flying squid, which you can see some cartoon drawings of here, as both a better way to understand the status of the stock, but also to explore future options for management of that stock, which is very heavily exploited as well. And I mentioned there has been some recent collaboration already in 2025 with some NPFC scientists traveling to Canada to meet with some MSC experts. And that may be developing into a project that can continue at the Neon Flying Squid Small Scientific Working Group this July in China. At that December Scientific Committee meeting, we also heard several positive comments from members and observers on MP-related issues. So these things may not have made it into the formal recommendations of the SC, but these were other issues that came up that I thought were interested to highlight here. Including developing MSC for chub mackerel, one of the other major primary species for NPFC, building on the progress of that was just recently made over the last 18 months or so on developing a stock assessment for that species. And in fact, last month, again, language was adopted in the 2025 chub mackerel measure that called for development of MSC and eventual adoption of an MP. There's no firm time limit on that because there are some other scientific issues for that stock that they're working on at the same time, but it was still nice to see the commission calling on scientists to consider moving in that direction. At the SC, there was also mention of developing MSC and adopting a management procedure for sablefish in the North Pacific, and that's specifically the catch that happens on the high seas or in the NPFC convention area. Noting that the Canadian domestic sablefish fisheries are already managed with an MP that was developed through MSC. So this may be a case of finding a way to expand that effort to consider the catch on the high seas, or it may be something that requires a kind of off-the-shelf MSC specific to the convention area. And finally, there was discussion of how MPs or MSE may be a useful tool, along with things like area-based management and recovering the region's priority deep water stocks, the North Pacific Armorhead and Splendid Alfonsina, which I mentioned earlier. Those are stocks that have been overfished for a long time, and in some areas have led to fisheries closures. And it may be possible to use these tools that we're talking about today to recover some of those stocks and potentially even someday reopen a fishery somewhere. So I keep talking about MSC, and I know this is a lessons learned about MPs, the management procedures, the harvest strategies, but I keep going back to MSC, and I wanted to just spend one slide talking about why I think that's so important. Essentially, the MSE is the detailed scientific model that simulates the expected performance of different possible MPs. And it can do that across a whole range of different biological and environmental characteristics, a range of different fisheries activities. And that range may be defined by things that we've seen in the past, and then as a result, things that could be expected to be seen again in the future. Each of those combinations of characters or characteristics is called an operating model. And each operating model is meant to basically tell the story of one possible future for that fishery. So the MSE is helping us identify management measures that are likely to be successful across a range of different futures, one of which is likely to be the true outcome. MSE is also important because it could help incorporate things that have not been observed in the past, but maybe are expected in the future. Like, for example, the results of ongoing climate change, which is particularly important in the North Pacific, which I'll talk about in just a moment on the next slide. So it's a very important tool, a very valuable tool in testing candidate management procedures' ability to meet the manager's objectives, even when those objectives pull in opposite directions. So maybe one objective is to maximize catch in the short term, maybe another objective is to ensure long-term sustainability or maximize biomass left in the water, and these pull in opposite directions. And MSE is one of the scientific tools that we can use to help find something that best meets all of those competing objectives. It accounts for the scientific uncertainty, as I mentioned, environmental change, etc. And as I said on the previous slide, with both Pacific Sari and neon flying squid, NPFC is using MSE to better understand the state of its priority stocks, while also exploring ways to adopt new management that will meet the manager's expectations. So I just want to quickly mention then part of the reason I went into so much detail on MSE is that climate change in the NPFC context is very important. It came up multiple times at the meeting last month, and in fact was the topic, one of the topics of a side event that was put on by several organizations and included here Mr. Masa Miyahara, who is one of the long-term experts in fisheries management from Japan, and gave a really interesting, compelling presentation about how climate change is affecting NPFC fisheries. And it's particularly sensitive because with the EEZs being outside of the convention area, as fish stocks or the center of distribution of these stocks are moving from inside an EEZ like Japan's to outside the EEZ into the NPFC convention area, that is sort of a geopolitical issue that requires action. And so I'm just suggesting the MSE could be used as a tool to examine the impacts of climate change on these fish and their fisheries, and maybe is even something to try to ease how NPFC is addressing these new management challenges of having fewer opportunities inside EEZs and more opportunities on the high seas. So just quickly, a few take-home messages then. At NPFC, there, with respect to harvest strategies specifically, there is more to do on Pacific Sari, and there's a significant interest in exploration and development for other stocks and fisheries. The commission meeting, which just happened last month, already demonstrated the efficiency of HCRs and MPs with, as I mentioned, the Sari catch limit being set in just minutes rather than days. And the MSE and MPs can be used to address the substantial impacts of climate change in the North Pacific. So a recommendation for me, I want to be very clear, this is for me. NPFC should be open to developing MPs for multiple stocks at the same time, especially when one or different members, different scientists have interest in leading efforts for different fisheries. So for example, and I've sort of made up this list, but we know that Pacific Sari is extremely important to Japan, and finishing this job on Sari is important to Japan. We know that Canada has a specific interest in sablefish, China on neon flying squid, the USA on recovering North Pacific armorhead and Alfonsino. So when there are different members and different experts interested in different stocks and different fisheries, it should be welcome to take on multiple MP processes at the same time, develop multiple MSEs at the same time. Now, if you look at that list, you do see missing from that list chub mackerel, and we probably need to find someone who's able and willing to lead on chub mackerel. That may just need to be after Pacific Sari is completed. And then I just wanted to highlight from the NPFC's own performance review here, the recommendation that the commission, through its members, should increase efforts to advance its work, in particular the development of management procedures and harvest control rules for NPFC priority stocks. So this is something that even an independent panel of experts agrees on. And then just before I hand the microphone back to you, Chloe, I just wanted to mention that there is a little bit of a gap in the equatorial Pacific. The next speaker you're going to hear from will talk about SPRIFMO, but the NPFC and SPRIFMO convention areas do not touch in the high seas and in the equatorial Pacific. So there's a lot of fishing going on in that area for things like squid, things like mahi-mahi that have unclear management responsibilities. And so, you know, I don't really have a recommendation here or a challenge, but I just wanted to point out that the reality that there is fishing taking place for unmanaged stocks because it's landing in this area between NPFC and SPRFMO, and there may be some opportunities for harvest strategies there without an obvious body or management organization to take on those opportunities. So with that, I'll just thank everybody and point you to a couple of websites here. Harborstrategies.org, of course, is our host today, and pewtrust.org/harborstrategies. And you can see here just one example on the right side of a fact sheet that harborstrategies.org colleagues put together on Pacific Sari when the commission was considering adoption of the interim HCR last year. So lots of materials like that for lots of stocks all around the world available at one or both of these websites. And with that, I'll say thank you very much. And back to you, Chloe.
Thank you so much for that, Grant. That was just very insightful. Seems like there's lots of practical lessons to learn here from NPFC, and I'm sure people are going to have a ton of questions for you during the Q&A. So thank you for that. With that, we will then move on to the South Pacific, where management procedures efforts are also gaining momentum. Here with us today, we have Dr. Jim Iannelli, a senior scientist at NOAA, who will walk us through the process being made at the South Pacific Regional Fishery Management Organization and how MSC is used to guide decision-making there. Thank you so much, Jim. Jim, you may also be muted.
Yeah, sorry, my controls went to a different part of the screen. Can you see okay now?
Yes, that's great. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Chloe and everyone for inviting me to talk about something I've been working on quite a bit for the past 13 years or so. I became involved with the South Pacific RFMO before it was a commission, largely through colleagues working in Chile and putting together data sets. And so this talk will be a bit different. I'll have, and thanks Grantley for showing the area jurisdiction of SPRFMO in the last slide in particular, because I didn't have that, but I do invite interested people to have a look at the website sprfmo.int, and this is INT, and this is just my slide to show, on the left, kind of the general MSE goals and trade-offs and the different roads that need to be considered. And then on the right, just some of the issues that are related to getting the operating model and management procedure things set up. I am going to go into a bit of history, just because we've got a lot of it here at SPRFMO, because the stocks, the commission itself started when Jack mackerel stock was going through a heavy decline. And in some ways, it accelerated the decline because there was some subsidies that went into fishing for Jack mackerel. But it's just a infographic showing some of the steps that we've gone through. And, the big one being the delays and challenges that we've seen over the past decade. And not that anybody needs to be reminded of some of the schedule problems that the world has gone through, but it'd be remiss, talking about how we had to go online just as we were getting closer to adopting things. Thanks to coronavirus, we had lots of intersessional meetings in 2021 to try to make progress. In 2022, counted 39 days worth of meetings, not counting the actual SC. And these are all just listed here for the different topics covered by the South Pacific RFMO. And then, in 2023, it didn't even slow down that much. But fortunately, 2024, we kind of said, okay, let's get our schedule and have the members kind of get back to normal in terms of seeing things through. Anyway, so what has been in place for jack mackerel, and I'm not going to go through the details of this, but I'll go through the timeline of things in a second. But basically, like Fernando's thing, just inverted here, we've got low conditions that directed jack mackerel will be prohibited when the biomass is estimated to be below B lim. Kind of the middle zone here, if the stock is, this is part of our rebuilding strategy that we developed early on in 2013 and 2014. If it's below the target, then limit the fishing mortality to increase just to ensure that the stock is stable or at least increasing. That's kind of the rationale behind what you see below. And then as the stock nears the target, in this case, we have an assessment model I'll talk about briefly to use FMSY, but prohibit any stock decrease. So we use the principle of replacement yield in these two panels here so that we will select a TAC that will at least give you the replacement yield. And then any change in the TAC based on analysis has to be less than 15%. And then as the stock increases and above the target, the limit has to be less than 15%. And so that's been our interim management procedure. And I'll touch a little bit more on where we're headed with that. And this will be mostly about jack mackerel, since that is one of the most important stocks that we have at least reliably good information on and assessments. Well, how did we get there? Back in 2008, there was a dedicated jack mackerel / horse mackerel sponsored workshop in Santiago that world experts came and talked about stock structure. And this was the beginning of the formation of the commission itself. That led to this assessment simulation task team, which I was involved with. And that was a way to bring members on board testing stock assessment software. This was the first simulation testing for kind of which assessment software seemed to perform the best given known quantities. So while it wasn't a management procedure, it was an assessment reliability test, if you will. And so that's the beginning of what you see here. And by 2011, the group, the scientific committee, had accepted a working model that was used for setting catch advice. And then alternative hypotheses were developed. And in 2014, as I mentioned, the commission proposes a plan for rebuilding the stock. And that's basically that sheet that I was showing just before. And then we tested it as members of the ESC to go forward. And then that's continued on where we've gone update and full assessments, where full might have a data focus to improve the assessment. And this is just kind of the background. And now we're presently in a cycle for benchmark analyses similar to what's done in Europe and elsewhere to update things. Well, here again is that the current management procedure, or I should say catch advice procedure, and it was evaluated. Apologies for the graphic here, but we did not have a full feedback loop, but we did, based on EU scientists, evaluate a number of different procedures along the columns here, showing against performance metrics, which is basically the probability of being below BMSY, the catch, those trade-offs, how much variability a specific column had towards the TAC. And then most importantly is the probability of decline. So we really wanted a low probability of further decline because the stock was at a very low level. And so basically the commission proposed a rebuilding strategy with member scientists. And then it brought that forward, and based on basically a test where it's like an approximation of what the stock assessment, it's kind of the European shortcut method was used to develop this 2014. And that's what we've been using for our analysis and TAC recommendations. And it's initially labeled Annex K of the commission report, and then updated to include some new details. Just some background of why the focus was on this. Historically, the catch of jack mackerel has been almost to 5 million tons in the mid 1990s. So it's a very significant fishery. The species itself is quite valuable, and the product mix has changed over time, but it has a high quality, generally 20 kilogram frozen boxes that get used, and just the main groups of members. So within Chile, there's a north and south central area. Far north refers to primarily Peruvian and Ecuadorian catch. And then the offshore fleet is the Russian and the European Union and the Asian fleets, Korea and China have participated historically in the fishery itself. So you can see that it's quite significant. And back when we made our first catch advice, it was well below 500,000 tons. I think our first TAC advice was 360, and I'd rather say we were lucky than good, but we have seen evidence of a steady increase in the stock, and that's something that's we feel good about. And one of the reasons that we've been able to successfully implement a stock assessment instead of a management procedure is that it was well known that there was one primary goal: to rebuild the stock. Now the new MSE is really dealing with trade-offs of the stock once it has rebuilt. What is probability of being in the Kobe green and those types of questions. I mentioned this 2008 meeting sponsored by FAO, and one of the early debates and continued debates is the stock structure of jack mackerel. And this is one of the reasons why I, in particular, am very keen to move away from the current practice of having a debate every year. It actually breaks down by members, basically picking sides, that there's one hypothesis that says there's a split in the far north, and then there's the southern and offshore fleet or stock, versus there's a single stock that does have some basically cut off of distributions, but it's pretty much considered to be from the same spawning groups, just varies in space and time from year to year. And so basically, this is one of the issues that we have to deal with. Is basically now our current practice, we do 3 assessments, and we take advice from hypothesis 1 with multiple stocks and versus hypothesis 2, and we've basically plotted a path towards coming to agreement, which has been a big challenge on how to provide advice to the commission. And just on the agreement side, I guess one thing that we benefited from is a lot of continuity among member scientists. And one of the things that I think it's important in doing assessments, at least in my view, is that you have the background of where data came from, what the issues have been historically, and how they can be implemented in different ways. So just an example here of, this is one stock for the one stock hypothesis, and we do see the stock rebuilding, some improvements in recruitment based on the available data, and then the concomitant increases in catches. The blue lines here our dynamic reference points. So I won't go into the details of that. I could later, but that's just one of the features of that. So where are we now? We want to move to something that's a bit simpler, that avoids the debate of stock structure every year, and something that is more manageable. As a matter of fact, squid fisheries are very big in the South Pacific, on the order of 2 million tons a year. So they need attention. We have lots of deep water species, as Grantley showed. Some of those are the same. And there's Patagonian toothfish that are important, all kinds of species that require some dedication from member scientists. And so having something where it's, that everybody is spread pretty thin, and we need to be able to make things more efficient. And so converting to a simple management procedure seems pretty important. Well, one of the problems is when we look at the actual data, and thanks to the EU scientists that have put some of this together, but this is our standard output. And what is this? Is the CPU and indices that we get for jack mackerel. And when they're increasing in some areas, they're not necessarily doing likewise elsewhere. For example, this acoustic survey has now a couple of years of high values on the order of 2 or 3 million tons of estimates, but very uncertain. But also very inconsistent historically. And so one of the issues when the years that the fishery was on the order of 4.5, 5 million tons, interestingly to me, most of that catch appeared to occur very close to the shore. And these fish extend all the way to New Zealand, but that one period when there was the highest catches, they were very close to the coast of South America. So it's not like when there's lots of them, they're ubiquitous everywhere. It's like there's lots of them, and then they can spread. So that's just one of the issues that we have to deal with. So developing a empirical based MP is underway, but these are the problems that we see occurring for that. I will just talk briefly for a second on squid fisheries. Those, we've had lots of workshops. Their life history is very complex. It's short, there's high turnover. I'm really interested in looking towards what the North Pacific Fishery Commission is doing towards neon squid to see if there's things we can borrow. But so far, the amount of information and data that are even available to properly develop an operating model that can be reliably tested is going to be a big job. And diverting some science away from jack mackerel and other issues towards this, that's a trade-off on the RFMO scale of things, if you will. And so just what's been happening, we've got some really good developments. Almost every year there's different sets of models developed by members. Kalamazoo's really stepped in and provided and encouraged finer resolution data on a monthly scale, and that's developed some interesting models. So there is hope that we'll be able to have some agreed upon operating models that we can develop. Personally, I think I've been involved with trying to develop a conservation and management measure, a CMM, where it's such a difficult stock or set of stocks to evaluate. Let's at least get the motion going of limiting fishing effort. And it turns out that's actually very difficult to do based on how data are recorded and things like that. So we're working on the MSE, and that's something that we hope I think will probably end up being an effort-based control, just because the idea of having a near real-time index of squid abundance, unless you have a very well-balanced data collection scheme through EM or something, or effort, that would be hard to implement otherwise. And just to wrap up, the outlook for MSEs, I think the good things for using management strategy evaluations are available. We, as with many members, we have lots of complexity in communicating things. Finalizing it's not just an international issue. It becomes because Chile has allowed SPRIFMO science to guide their management in their zone. That doesn't necessarily mean that the evaluation of allocation among different sectors and user groups is going to stay the same through time. And so there's a lot of different pressure politically within members and among members, and that's something that's I think we probably need to talk about more in actual MSE design, is how predictable the process of managing the stocks will be. Because, I mean, the commission has the right to take the science advice and make their set their quota recommendations, and the allocations among members in this case are heavily negotiated. So those are different things I think that cause problems. And I just like to wrap up just thanking the funding sources that have occurred. I left off NOAA here. I still have a job here at NOAA. They pay my salary, even though I've been able to contribute to some of this work. And with that, I think I'm close to time.
Thank you so much for that, Jim. That was really insightful and quite interesting to hear about the Jack Mack developments for MSC and an MP there, and the future work for the squid fishery as well. It sounds like you, SPRIFMO and NPFC, have a lot that they could potentially learn from each other regarding squid. So that's great to hear. And with that, we will go ahead and shift over to the Indian Ocean, where the Southern Indian Ocean Fisheries Agreement, CIOFA, is laying the groundwork for a management procedure approach. With that, we are joined by Dr. Marco Milardi, Science Officer at CIOFA, who will share the latest developments and also challenges from this region. Take it away, Marco. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe, and hello, everyone. I do know many of you, and here with me is my assistant, my little cat that's on my lap. So I'm gonna try and get my presentation. Just please let me know if this is actually working. If it gets to you right and you can hear me well.
We can hear you and we can see it. You'll just need to pop it into presentation mode.
I am trying.
I've really missed your cat.
Long story, we'll talk about it. And really glad to see all of you. Just, put my hands forward. This is not my specialty. And I was thrown off the deep end as a project coordinator in CIOFA to actually lead the projects related to the precautionary approach and management. And this is what I'm going to focus on today. But before I do that, I just would like to give a general introduction to CIOFA. We have seen some maps, so more or less you know where we are. Again, 5 seas and the Indian Ocean. This is a map of our areas, and of course there's a sub-area subdivision. So we are the South Indian Ocean RFMO, but we are not the only ones here. UTC, which is focused on highly migratory species. I'm going to talk only about all the other species that are not highly migratory. We have 10 contracting parties and 2 more comparative non-contracting parties, with 1 participating fishing entity, which is a bit of a political norm for a contracting party of a different kind. I just want to recall the objectives of the RFMO here, and I know it sounds trivial, but it's quite important going forward because they are very relevant to harvest strategies in general. Like, first of all, of course, we have to ensure the long-term conservation and the sustainable use of resources. But there's also within the goals of the agreement of CIOFA, there's promoting the sustainable development of fisheries. So this is quite critical because you'll see CIOFA has relatively small fisheries compared to the RFMOs that we have talked about so far tonight. But then at the same time, there is an interest to develop the fisheries, and this has to be taken into account when developing harvest strategies. Our concept of harvest strategies hasn't been like actually put on paper. I was looking for it, but I tried to make my own summary. Try to have catch limits, fishing rules, and adaptive responses for the stock management is the way that the CIOFA defines their framework for harvest strategies. The core way that CIOFA does it or decided to do it is harvest control rules. And that's just what they use to adjust biological reference points to assess where the harvest control rules are taking that effort. We do have stock assessments, but we have data limited fisheries. I would say all fisheries in CIOFA are data limited. In some ways, you could consider them exploratory because they've been going on for a while and they have collected some data, but we actually only managed to have a full-fledged stock assessment for one of the species, and that is not always informing harvest control rules. So we have a precautionary focus as well. A development of the precautionary approach framework. And that is because, of course, we have this data limitation, and therefore, like, we have to try and meet those agreement objectives, the articles that I mentioned before, a sustainable use, sustainable development for these fisheries, using a precautionary approach because of the data limitations. Wanted to give you a bit of history of why we are here and how we got here. And a lot of it is prior to my joining the RFMO. The first part was the very early days, so between the founding and 2018, more or less, there was a conceptualization of the whole assessment tires, the testing and the precautionary for controls for key species. But this was like very rudimentary. The work actually started to pick up pace again, like before my time. They started discussing target reference points and limit reference points for castability, but these were not applied to any of the species in particular. 2022-23, I think that was the turning point and the work in CIOFA, because they actually started having like some committees and some of the workshops started happening over there. These were quite crucial. They were joint workshops between the scientific committee and the MOP, which is like our commission, where they discussed interim harvest control rules. So this is actually where the adoptions of the reference points and such started actually. But the goal was basically a very reasonable maintaining current catches. For example, some of the harvest control rules that were put in place in this period were simply, let's keep the catch levels as an average of the last 5 years. This is a very standard practice, and it sounds very rudimentary again, but it's quite effective when you don't know much else. And this is quite similar to what Jim mentioned for squid in the Spreadmo area. However, now things really got into gear in 2024. This is the stage where we are actually doing something. So we had some meetings and workshops, but we now do something. We do that thanks to some projects that I will introduce in the next slides. So this is the time where we are finalizing the strategies for the priority species. I'll talk about those, what they are. And then we are trying to address a bit about allocations and effort creep, and then integrating the ecosystem and bycatch goals into all this framework. We do that through a project that is supported by the European Union. So this project is called the CIOFA PAM, Precautionary Approach and Management. I know I'm coming up with these acronyms by myself, so don't judge. This project is basically having the overall objective of producing that scientific advice. And I just want to make a little side note on this one, where CIOFA, compared to other RFMOs, the research is not always led by member states and CCPs. It's actually led by consultants that provide this advice. So we have a fundamentally different setup. This project is actually going to provide that scientific advice that is then reviewed by the scientific committee, adopted by the scientific committee, and then taken up in joint meetings with the commission. The idea is that we develop a framework. So we don't actually have the precautionary approach framework. We want to have this approach harmonized to ensure that the fisheries management is sustainable. We are focusing these efforts on the information limited fisheries. And as I said, by most definitions, I would say all of ours are information limited fisheries. And we have a focus that is very strong on stakeholder engagement. So again, joint meetings with the scientific committee and meetings of the parties and CCPs, they are the key to actually progress this work. I have to say that, again, compared to other RFMOs, the work in CIOFA has been extraordinarily easy because of these meetings that have created like an environment, of course, that can be implemented even more, but between the scientific committee and the commission. But it's also facilitated by the nature of the fisheries. Again, few vessels, few species, that actually makes people way more comfortable in managing the fisheries in a relaxed, in a way, framework. However, this might change at a moment's notice when, for example, new stakeholders or new fisheries are started or restarted, as we are seeing like recently in CIOFA. But overall, I think the main objective of the main outcome of this project should be that we, at the end of the project, get these management measures adopted by CIOFA. That means adopted within the CMMs and such. Not an easy task. We have tried to split this project into 3 different objectives. Each objective is basically a separate project that has been assigned to a consultant, awarded to a consultant. The first one being the precautionary approach framework project, where obviously the main objective is to develop this framework. And we are trying to do that as a 2-step process. The first one being having the conceptual principles defined, and then translating these conceptual principles into operational guidelines. We are trying to use the best practices with CIOFA processes. And here is where we actually draw a lot from different RFMOs. SPREFMO is one, obviously NPFC is another one, WCPFC for some of the things, and as well from national, because of course a lot of participants come from the Pacific area, and I myself have experienced, I think, a lot Cook Islands and other kind of national frameworks are filtering down into this framework design here. And this development is to keep the management very adaptive. So because of the different data availability for the different fisheries, and we need to have like a tailored approach that is allowing for some flexibility in management. And also we need to have very definite roles for the different scientists, committees, and managers that are involved in the process. This is where we are getting here. And then last but not least, we do need an alignment with other RFMOs. This is very practical. We have seen toothfish being an important species and SPREFMO. It obviously is an important species for us as well. And of course, both of our stocks, SPREFMO and CIOFA, are on the margins of the camellar stocks. So we want to have our framework aligning with the other RFMOs around us. CIFO is another RFMO that is east of CIOFA and also has some toothfish fishery, at least in the past. And now they're starting again to have them in more numbers, higher numbers. So we want to have like measures that are harmonized with the other RFMOs, and the framework should allow for that harmonization to happen. There's two more objectives in this project. The number two would be around the reference points. Obviously, we need to guide the managers. That's our why this is important. Guide the managers on the status relative to the management objectives, and we are having an interim standard, and they are aligned with the camellar ones for toothfish, and very much aligned with international standards for all the other species. But we have only touched on for the interim BRPs, we have only touched on toothfish and on orange roughy, which are two very key species. But then there's more species in CIOFA, and this project should propose some default biological reference points for the low, medium, and high information stocks. I bolden low because there's not that many medium and high information stocks per se in CIOFA. Most of them are actually low information, and that's again like our focus. We are trying to do that biological reference point setting by considering stock productivity and exploitation patterns. So we are going again here to explore RFMOs as to derive those productivity, status, and exploitations when the information is not available or not sufficient in CIOFA. And then some sort of development that is systematic. So we have some sort of uncertainty analysis, or our uncertainties at least identified. We try to have conditions. For example, if more data becomes available, this falls into another tier and then it gets another profile. And obviously, and buffers around, for example, confidence intervals around the status that we don't want to exceed, or then having some stock specific default reference points for those stocks that we can identify. Last part of this project is the developing the actual harvest strategies, and this is done for fish stocks, orange roughy being one of those, and that's the strange animal you see in this picture if you've never seen one. This is the most complicated and probably will be produced last part of the project because it involves having some simulations and some analysis. So we would like to test some of the harvest strategies, at least for orange roughy and toothfish, potentially as well for Alfonsino. So these would be scenarios, and then it would be useful for managers to see how how effective is the harvest strategy and what are the trade-offs between the different management choices that they have. They would have to define all the different management objectives, BRPs and HERs, to do that. So that's also the reason why this element comes later on in the work, and ensure again like that there is some sort of an adaptability and monitoring the harvest control rules and breakout rules in case certain triggers are activated during the management process. Once again, this is one of the processes that needs to be aligned with the precautionary approach framework. So as you can imagine, the challenge in coordinating this process is that each and every component of this, like all the three objectives that I just talked about, needs to really coordinate with each other. to make a coherent framework and a coherent output. This is facilitated by actually having only two groups of consultants that are addressing these projects, and it still requires quite a lot of coordination with the consultants, the scientific committee, and the MOP, our commission, to make this happen in the best way. And what we are expecting is that don't be scared. You don't need to read this. There's a complicated timeline we have prepared to go from 2024, where the project actually started, to 2025, where the bulk of the work is going to be done, up to 2026, where the work is going to be finalized. So this year we started having by having a workshop where we have discussed the approaches proposed by the consultants, and they were agreed upon by the scientific committee. By the workshop first, and then by the scientific committee. We are emphasizing the adaptive and precautionary frameworks, but we have more workshops coming up. So there's different workshops that are there. We have a timeline for drafts to be circulated ahead of these workshops, and the next workshop, in case people want to see the outcomes, everything is then published on the CIOPA website, is foreseen for July and August this year. And then another potential workshop is going to be later on in December or in early 2026 with the MOP. The main goal, of course, is that this project is completed. All the reports are submitted to the next year's scientific committee in March, and that their outcomes from the scientific committee discussion inform the MOP 13 decision in 2026. If that works well, and I do my job well, that might get us to operational harvest strategies in place by 2027, which would be quite a major achievement for the organization. This is one of the main focuses of work and the scientific committee of CIOPA for 2025, really. But I don't want to keep you long. We have seen a lot of presentations. I would like just to send you home with a message, just a few points. First of all, that we have a process for harvest strategies. It's but we do have a process that defines harvest strategies. It has interim biological reference points. For example, here I have the 40% beat zero for orange roughy and the 50% beat zero for fish taken from other IGOs like Camellar or from general, for example, New Zealand, and the reference points for orange roughy. And these are used to guide this. I stress once again, this is the third time I do it. We have a tired method, especially high, medium, and low, but it's mostly high and low data. And we are prioritizing simple rules like maintaining catch averages for most species, because we don't have as good data as other RFMOs on these fisheries. We have a species priorities. So the key species like orange roughy and toothfish, where we are aligning with Camellar, and then other species are deferred until 2026, because those are the species where we have most information on. So we have a focus on this, and then the other species still will be done. We want to keep everything adaptable, partly because there's a big question on climate resilience, but as well because we would like to have breakout rules. We are doing tentative management, if you want, by setting reasonable management goals and different harvest strategies, but we want to have breakout rules. This was very much emphasized in all the discussions, just in case something goes haywire and we have made some errors to make our changes. And then last but not least, again, we want to align with other RFMOs, and then the catch allocation frameworks, they need to be developed to balance members' interest. But this is partly in the remit of the scientific committee, but this is definitely something that is going to become more and more relevant with owning in existing fisheries or restarting fisheries that were historically abandoned. And with that, I'll just thank you. Hope this was short and to the point, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on in the session. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marco. It's really encouraging to see the momentum that is starting to build at CIOFA now. And to round out our lineup today, we're pleased to welcome Ms. Esther Hidas, Project Manager of the Common Oceans Deep Sea Fisheries Project at FAO. She'll be speaking about the important role of cross-RFMO collaboration and how both general and specialized RFMOs, including tuna-focused organizations, can learn from one another as they develop and implement management procedures. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chloe, and good afternoon or good evening, everyone. While I'm sharing, just make a note that I'm sorry if I keep coughing. I've had a bronchitis for last week, and it's incredibly difficult to control, so apologies for any coughs across the presentation. So thanks for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me. As a first few slides, I just wanted to make sure everyone is familiar with the Common Oceans Program and its projects. It's kind of important for the rest of the presentation, so it's just to make sure everyone is aware. The Common Oceans Program, I think, Chloe, you said it at the beginning, is funded by the Global Environment Facility, and it has these 5 projects listed on the bottom: the Sargasso Sea, the cross-sectoral cooperation, and then 2 fisheries projects focused on tuna and deep sea fisheries, and then a global coordination project that sort of coordinates the 5 projects. And in terms of collaboration, we do aim to ensure a cross-collaboration and pick up synergies across the different projects. But obviously, if you take a look here, the clear synergies that have like the closest synergies are the tuna and deep sea fisheries projects. And that is really what's brought me here to this this webinar today. We have a close collaboration with the Tuna Fisheries Project and its partners, including the organizers, including Harvest Strategy, the Global Ocean Foundation and Pew Charitable Trusts. So in terms of the Deep Sea Fisheries Project, just a very quick introduction for those who don't know. We have implemented by FAO. The project is executed by GFCM, and the project brings together the 7 RFMOs that have a mandate to manage deep sea fisheries. So I think most people are familiar with these: GFCM for the Mediterranean, NAFO and NIAFC for the North Atlantic, and PFC for the North Pacific, SPRIFMO for the South Pacific, CIAFO for the Southeast Atlantic, and CIOFA from the Indian Ocean. And then you'll see on the map here also CAMLA. They are not formally part of the project, but we do collaborate with them informally as much as possible. And then the other partners include NOAA from the USA, the scientific advisory body ICES, and 2 private sector organizations, CIODFA and ICFA. And in terms of the project objective, it's very much focused on deep sea fisheries in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And the project aims to ensure that deep sea fisheries in the ABNJ are managed under an ecosystem approach, with stocks at levels capable of maximizing sustainable yields and minimizing impacts on biodiversity. And we do have a focus on data-limited stocks, deep water sharks, and vulnerable marine ecosystems. And in terms of the key technical areas of work, there's an area of work on strengthening and implementing regulatory frameworks. Then a large portion of the work is about improving deep sea fisheries management. And then there's also reducing environmental impact. But probably the most important overarching goal of the project is to ensure this cross-RFMO sharing of knowledge, experiences, and best practices. Now, in terms of the webinar key focus topic of management procedures, I'll start by saying that actually this project to begin with didn't have any work focused on management procedures. Instead, what the first output focused on was to identify gaps in regional obligations to manage fish stocks and propose corrective measures. And it is through working on this output that led us to the road down, or the path to management procedures. So let me tell you a little bit about that. Basically, at the beginning of the project, we carried out this desktop study, which contrasted the conservation and management measures of the 7 deep sea RFMOs against obligations outlined in international instruments. We considered all relevant provisions of the international legal framework for ocean and fisheries governance. And we looked at 2 main categories of obligations: the long-term conservation and sustainable use of fishery resources, and monitoring, control, and surveillance. I'm not going to talk much about the MCS aspects, but what I want to say is that through the study, we noted quite a weak implementation of measures related to the long-term sustainable management of deep sea stocks in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We looked at 65 deep sea stocks in the ABNJ, and of those, at the time, 41% had limit reference points, 21% had target reference points, and only 18% had any kind of long-term management plan. So with this, we thought that the project, through its 5 years, could really bring some positive change and promote a more long-term thinking to the management of deep sea fish stocks. And the first thing we did to get this going was to organize a virtual workshop back in October last year, which aimed to take stock of current application of the precautionary approach to the management of deep sea fish stocks and aimed to identify activities that could support improved implementation under the project. So the workshop brought together 87 participants, including scientists, government officials from 15 countries, NGOs, academia, and industry. And when you look at the agenda, you might see some similarities actually with this current webinar. But what we aim to do is to do an overview of international requirements for the application of the precautionary approach to fisheries management. So this was a presentation done by FAO, as well as looking at the scientific considerations to the application of the precautionary approach to fisheries management, also done by FAO. And then we had some examples from the field of what has been done in terms of ensuring this, applying precautionary management of deep sea fish stocks by different RFMOs. So we had the example that Fernando presented today. And we also had GFCM speak about their long-term management plans that they recently adopted for shrimp. And then we had Shana Miller from the Ocean Foundation give us an overview of management strategy evaluations and harvest strategies, particularly showing a bit how these are developed and what the benefits are, how they could benefit also deep sea fish stocks. And then the end of the workshop, we aim to capture what participants' feedback was to these presentations. And the feedback basically provided 4 different areas of recommendations. One was capacity building and training. So they recommended enhancing training programs for scientists and managers, particularly on management strategy evaluations and harvest strategy development. Improve communication between the scientific and policy communities, and expand access to resources, including those provided by the harveststrategies.org website. They also recommended guidance and best practices, so for FAO, for the project, to develop clear practical guidelines on the implementation of the precautionary approach, as well as possibly management strategy evaluations and harvest strategies, and also to compile successful case studies to serve as reference models. The third area was to strengthen RFMO processes, and a very important recommendation that came out was to establish these dedicated science manager dialogue groups to facilitate discussions in RFMOs where these don't yet exist. And another one was to create a roster of independent scientists to assist with MSc development. And this second point came out of the fact that there was some concern raised about, obviously, the recognition of how valuable MSEs are, but at the same time concern for the capacity and time they need to be developed. So they thought that this roster of independent scientists that could support different RFMOs with MSc development could be really useful. And finally, expanding access to tools and resources, and here was increasing awareness and accessibility of tools that promote the implementation of the precautionary approach. So this was the workshop that we held last year, and this is just to give you the QR code if you wanted to see a more detail, the workshop report. And I also wanted to mention that we did a short blog about this this workshop, and it was published on the harveststrategies.org website as well. I wanted to also mention that through the project, we held a symposium on applying the ecosystem approach to fisheries management in areas beyond national jurisdiction. I'm deviating slightly, but this is important in terms of the key messages. So this symposium was held in March this year at FAO. It brought together over 100 participants from all our different partner RFMOs and aimed to take stock of what is currently being done in terms of applying the ecosystem approach to fisheries management in the ABNJ by different deep sea RFMOs, and where to from here, what is really needed to expedite implementation. And the key takeaways from this symposium, at least these are my key takeaways. There will be a report that sort of consolidates everyone's feedback, but my key takeaways were there are many tools and guides already available for the implementation of EAFM in the ABNJ. Most RFMOs are already doing a lot, but what's really missing is, again, this cross-RFMO dialogue and also the science manager dialogues. So where it was really a very big key message that came out of the symposium is how important it is for scientists and managers, and I might add also industry, to sit together informally and be able to discuss key objectives that they want to achieve, and also get on the same page about how they want to achieve those objectives to facilitate implementation. So not only about EAFM in this case, but also about implementing the precautionary approach. And there was also a discussion about having an RFMO level roadmap on EAFM. And again, I see here similarities with having a roadmap on the precautionary approach. If a roadmap is developed at RFMO level, then there's real clarity about what is trying to be achieved, and it becomes much simpler to develop than species or stock-specific harvest strategies from there. So bringing this all together, what the project intends to do from here until the end of its until the end of the project in 2027. We've heard our participants from the workshop, the PA precautionary approach workshop. We've heard our participants from the EAFM symposium. And so what we aim to do from here on is to really promote best practices, and very much in collaboration with Tuna Project and its partners. So we want to contribute to webinars such as this one that's being held today, but others possibly that will be held in the future. Contribute to side events that really promote these key messages that I spoke about. And there is a possibility that we will develop a publication that will aim to take stock of good practices from different RFMOs and put that together into a bit of a compendium that also draws together some key recommendations for application of the precautionary approach in RFMOs in the ABNJ. But this publication is to be approved still, so I can't say that it will be done for sure. Secondly, we would like to provide as many opportunities for cross-RFMO learning as possible. So I don't want to say that we are an endless pot of money, but I definitely do want to pass on the message that this project is very much there for the RFMOs to make use of, to ensure that these cross RFMO learning is taking place. So an example could be if a representative of a scientific committee from SPRIFMO wishes to attend a meeting of the CIOFA and makes a request to us, we could possibly fund that. Another option could be we are contacted to say, please, can you put together a half-day webinar or short workshop to give us various options from different RFMOs on different tools that already exist. We can do that. So we're very much here to provide that support to the RFMOs and to all our partners. And please make use of that while the project is still there for the next 2.5 years. We're also all about promoting available tools. I've pulled out here a couple of, I think, really, really useful fact sheets that have been posted on the harveststrategies.org website. I think they're tremendously helpful and very easy to follow. So we'll be promoting these tools and really encourage also RFMOs to make use of those tools. I believe that there will be also an e-learning course shortly available. So we will be also promoting that together with the tuna project. And then lastly, other actions as requested and identified. So again, I reiterate our availability for discussion and dialogue on how this project can facilitate improved application of the precautionary approach in the ABNJ, especially for deep sea stocks, deep sea fishery stocks, but also beyond. And we're very much ready to support that so that we see a real improvement during the life cycle of the project. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Esther. That was an excellent presentation to kind of tie everything together that we have already learned so far today. And I'm really looking forward now to switching and pivoting to our Q&A section. That concludes our speakers for the day. We have about 15 minutes or so set aside for questions and discussion. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like to ask a question live, feel free to raise your hand. Alternatively, you can submit questions in the chat, as well as the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. And I may actually, oh, go ahead, Doug.
Okay, I'll barge in and take the opportunity to make 2 points since the time is short. And they both come out of Fernando's original NAFO presentation, but the first one connects with what Esther has just said. As Esther mentioned, the importance of the manager-scientist dialogue, as she calls it. That's easily said, and it's obviously critical with management procedure development because you're looking at long-term and at trade-offs between objectives. But in practice, it's very difficult to put into place. Now, people may not have realized with NAFO, when you heard Fernando say he's a co-chair of the RBMS group, that NAFO has been the first to effectively put together a formal grouping of managers and scientists who play exactly that role. And I think that's very important, and that other groups could do well to take cognizance of exactly what NAFO has done. NAFO has some advantages in that it's not too big, so that group doesn't have to be too big. But I think that is one of the great successes of the NAFO story has been development of that, as they call it, risk-based management, RBMS management strategy group. And I think others could do well to copy that. But the one technical point I wanted to raise as well, and again, it's something rather NAFO specific, in NAFO moving ahead of the game. One of the big objections you get from managers to the MP approach is it gives you an answer. And managers don't like to be bound by a single answer. They're brought up to negotiate, and it doesn't sit well with them. But most MP approaches, they give you one and only one answer, and that's the scientific recommendation. And where do you go from there? Well, what Fernando explained is the NAFO approach, for the PA approach, allows some flexibility. It says if you're in a certain range of biomass, it's not that the answer is X. The answer is somewhere between X and Y, and the managers have the flexibility to choose. But that raises another difficult issue from the evaluation point of view, and I hope I'm getting this right, and Fernando can perhaps correct me if I'm not, because I wasn't part of all this. When you simulation test, as indeed NAFO did for its PA framework as well, the computer needs an answer each time. It doesn't just spin a coin and say what's going to happen. And I think I'm correct in saying, and Fernando, correct me if I get it's wrong, that in the way it was simulation tested in NAFO, what happens is when you come to a position where in practice the managers would be given a choice, what the simulation testing does is it takes the biggest TAC possible in the circumstance, because that's the circumstance that leads to the highest potential risk. And you've got to make sure that you contain risk. So I think that's a big advance that NAFO has made, but what comes with it is the necessity to define how you're going to carry out the associated simulation testing. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Doug. If you would like to respond, Fernando, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Doug, to raise these two important points. About the first one, about the involving of the managers and the scientists to discuss all these things. I will also highlight in NAFO, we have two different joint working groups. One is the working group risk-based management strategy. I am the co-chair, and there are other joint working group to deal with all the matter related with the ecosystem approach. In this other working group, all the things related with the ecosystem approach and the implementation of the closed areas and so on is discussed between managers and scientists. And these working groups, the main task is to promote and to make recommendations to approve by the Commission in September. That is the main objective of this joint working group. About the testing process of the PA framework, well, we discussed many things about how we are going to testing, and finally we decided to make three different testing. Inside, in the leaf area, we take three different F values: the highest, the lowest, and the middle point. And we tested three different options for each of the biomass you making in the projections. And after one of the results I remember well was the difference between the highest and the lowest point of the leaf is not so important, because the structural error you put in the data is more widened than the final results of the level of F. I hope I clarify a little bit what that rise. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fernando. I have a quick question then for Grant. I'm curious, what unique challenges has NPFC faced in developing MPs, and how has the Commission worked to overcome them?
Sure, thanks, Chloe. And you know, some of the challenges I mentioned in the presentation a little bit already, like for example, those associated with climate change, and also just for those of us who kind of mostly have focused on tuna RFMOs, we're used to the areas inside national jurisdictions or EEZs being included in the convention area, and NPFC, like some other general RFMOs, that's not the case. So the combination of those two issues with climate change leading to some stocks moving into EEZs from the high seas or out of EEZs to the high seas, those can really be challenging. And one of the ways that NPFC has tried to overcome that challenge is by considering the impacts of fishing both inside and outside of the convention area, and ensuring that they're not only doing data collection, but that's considered in the simulation testing. And NPFC only sets a catch limit for the convention area, but that catch limit should be informed by what's happening in the domestic waters, or vice versa. Domestic decisions should be informed by what's happening in the convention area. And so far, with their one example of Pacific Sari, they've done a pretty good job of that, where changes to one have led to changes in the other, and vice versa. So but that's for somebody like me who's mostly a tuna RFMO person, to be honest. It's been an interesting challenge to watch those managers deal with.
Thanks so much for that insight, Grant. A quick question, if there's none in the Q&A so far, I have a question for Jim. I'm curious about SPRFMO has made quite a bit of important progress in developing MPs. However, there has yet to be an MSC tested MP adopted. So I'm curious what approaches have proven effective for building understanding and support among stakeholders, and also what more needs to be done.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Just to follow on with the tuna RFMO analogy, and to compare and contrast a little bit, with SPRFMO, for one that I'm familiar with, the southern bluefin tuna, it's basically one species and relatively few members that are involved. And you compare that to the WCPFC, where you've got a lot more species, a lot more competing interests and things like that. So I think SPRFMO is a little bit more like the WCPFC and the RFMO, tuna RFMO analogy, just because we do have so many species. But as far as, tested MPs, we started out with tested assessments and a clear goal to rebuild the stock. So I think those two things really kind of put us on the right course. Now and all of that was without too much concern about the competing objectives that we're faced with now. It was very focused towards that goal. One of the hard parts that we're facing is how to get the stakeholders and members to agree, on what the next goal is. We did have a science manager discussion, since that was brought up with Doug and Fernando there, just this last February at the commission meeting. And so that's been fairly effective, I think, in bridging the gap. I mentioned in my talk about how much we've lagged in keeping on our schedule and getting the MSE put forward. I think that's because we do have still a lot of capacity building to do among members, even though we've had incredible contributions over the years in developing the assessment software and making sure the data collection aspects are progressing. So I think that's probably right now our biggest challenge, is how to move forward with a valuable data set that members will commit to and agree upon. One thing, the last point with regards to our biggest challenge, I think, is that we have disparate changes in availability. You know, that it is compartmentalized. We have outside the economic zones, inside, and north and south, and they're not going to have the same catch rate. So, for example, right now, catch rates are quite good in Chile, so they're facing a lot of internal pressure to have a lot of fish to catch, and so they buy the quota from other members and still could use more for their sectors. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jim. Yes, Grant, go ahead.
I just had a quick question for Jim as well, actually. Just noting that I showed in my presentation a little table of the different harvest strategies that have been adopted and included some what I call simulation tested HCRs like Pacific Sari. Would you have included jack mackerel on that list because of the work you guys have done already? In other words, should I be adding it to my list?
Thanks for the question. I was wondering, you know, it's like kind of on a personal note, I think it should be added because it was a step in that direction. I mean, it was simulation tested, but it wasn't full feedback. And, you know, in effect, it's basically an interim management procedure, what we've been using. It's had some feedback from benchmark work, you know, so the first version of that management procedure control rule didn't include a B limb. And so from the last benchmark, we added that to satisfy some of the objectives that are coming out, in particular with the MSC certification, which we're part of the jack mackerel stock is certified. So as at least some members and stakeholders are very much interested in ensuring that an MSE moves forward. I'm sure everyone knows, but it's important that for MSC certified stocks that MSE gets completed within an RFMO. I think it's within 5 years.
Great, thank you, Jim. Fernando, go ahead.
Thank you. One thing I would like to raise about the MSc certification is in the RFMOs working group in the last meeting, we write a letter to the MSc in Canada because one of the requests of the MSc to certificate the fisheries if they want a specific management procedure for each of the stocks. They don't want a generic management procedure, sorry, like the general PA framework we approve in NAFO. And for me, it's quite difficult because one of the major problems of the MSE is that is a very good tool to develop management procedure, but not always you reach the management procedure to reach the objective put by the managers, and you need something to provide any year the advice. But that was raised in the RFMOs working group, and we sent a letter and we received the answer last week, I think, and we are going to discuss with the MSc certification in Canada what should be in the review of the process for the future. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Esther, go ahead.
Thank you, Chloe. And I just wanted to take advantage of the fact of, of Grant's question to ask something about your list, actually, Grant. The list that you showed on your slide. I'd be interested to know what qualifies for you to, what criteria you use for your list. And my most important question is the time frame part of your criteria? And that's the reason I ask that is because, as I mentioned in my presentation, one of the things that we have noted, at least for deep sea stocks in the ABNJ, is that generally there's not much sort of long-term thinking. That's why we said what we said, that you know, we're seeing this sort of yearly or every 2 yearly sort of biannually revision of where things are at, and you know, setting tax based every 2 years. And when you look at the international standards that are being, you know, obligations that are in the international instruments, it talks a lot about these long-term vision, long-term objectives. So I'd just be interested to know whether that's part of your criteria, and if so, what do you what time frame do you use? Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's that criteria, or the criteria we use there. I mean, I should say that's a Pew list, and sort of based on information published on harveststrategies.org, and I personally just consider things that are that have a harvest control rule that sort of takes the form of if X, then Y, if you know what I mean. Like if the stock is at X, then you can do Y. But not just that. We also it's important for me and for Pew that there is some simulation testing as well, so that we're not just simply setting a harvest control rule based on reference points that or that haven't been simulation tested, and so if there's some version of MSE or maybe an MSE light in the case of some of those interim HCRs, plus an HCR that has that form of if X then Y, then those two things combined are really what we've used to be our minimum kind of criteria. And that's why I asked Jim, seeing his presentation, if I've missed that one, you know. And then as far as time frame, I think they're very different, you know, with a squid that reaches maturity in 8 months, it's a very different timeline than with an orange roughy that takes a couple of decades. So I think that's part, you know, dependent on the life history of the animal. And so, yeah, we want long-term sustainability as a goal, but as I've said before, long-term sustainability is just maximizing catch over a different timeline, right? And so you have your catch you want to maximize, you have your stock you want to protect, and if you're doing both of those, excuse me, with the other two things I said, then we would include it on our list. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Doug, I see your hand is up, but we do have a question in the chat, so I want to get to that first. For all the panelists, we were wondering if any of the panelists involved in the MSE MP process, which have been in place for many years, have experience with modifying MPs over time, when to do it, how to interact with the commissions when they have new science information, best practices, etc. And I do recognize that we are over time, so thank you to all who are still here and joined with us. You're welcome to stay on and hear the answer, or the recording will be available.
Chloe, I was just going to say, I noticed in the chat that Fernando had to leave, because I think he would have been perfect to answer that one, seeing as NAFO has updated the halibut MP a couple of times since its original adoption. So maybe that's a question you can try to, or answer you can try to get from him and share with the participants.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that. And like I said, I know we're over time. This was such an insightful discussion. I want to give a quick thank you to all of the speakers that are here today. Thank you for sharing your valuable insights and perspectives. Also, a big thank you as well. And we want to just sneak in one more question we've got here. If you're willing to stick on and listen, Doug, go ahead and let's hear what you've got.
Thanks. 2 points. First, to add to the point just raised, the general line is plus minus every 6 years for review, that you should have formal reviews to take of the MP to take new information into account. And as you go across the RFMOs, you'll find 6 years is pretty much the standard there. The other question, going to Esther's one about the timeline, as I think it was Grantley or someone said, it depends on the biology of the species and particularly on the longevity. The point is you have to have a long enough period that the dynamics of the stock can play out. And with a short-lived squid, you get through that in just over a year. Whales, it takes a lot longer. So you have had, for instance, for whales, the period used is 100 years. Typically, if you're looking at small pelagics, probably 10 years would be plenty time. And for most of the other species, where this has been done, it's usually somewhere 20 or 30 years that is used. The 30 years for the longer living species. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Doug. Appreciate that. All right, if we don't have any other follow-up comments or questions for the panelists today, we won't keep you any longer. Just again, a special thank you for all of our speakers who joined here today. So grateful for all of your valuable insights and perspectives. Big thank you as well to our project advisory committee who helped shape the agenda for today and continue to support all of our very important work. We are so grateful to our partners, both at Pew and FAO Common Oceans team, and also to the Global Environmental Facility for making this work so possible. Special thanks again to our interpreters, and they make this whole presentation accessible to a lot of you, and also for those of you who joined from around the world today. So a recording of this will be available on our website, harveststrategies.org, and if you are on our mailing list, you will receive it via email as well. Thank you again, and be sure to check out our website for the next webinar coming sometime this summer. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing all of you soon.
Thanks and bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Nice job, Chloe. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim.